It's post UFC time, and once again, we have a pretty damn good card to break down because we had a lot of finishes, which is very cool. There was only one fight that really particularly annoyed me in any way, shape, or form, but there were some negatives. The judging was subpar, and I don't mean that the judging disagreed with my scores because we had a couple of fights here that I think legitimately could have gone a couple different ways. And the main event is maybe the best example of this, and we'll go through that. But it's one of those cases where the end result, the literal 48-47, whatever it is, scores totally make sense, but then when you look at it on a round by round basis, it really doesn't. So there is that. Anyways, let's just get into this. Obviously, we had the main event with Calvin Kattar versus Josh Emmett, and this was a very, very good fight. It started a bit slowly. The first two rounds were a little bit tepid, a lot of feeling out. A lot of guys, a lot of them trying to find their opening, their timing, whatever it happens to be. And essentially, it boils down to scoring these two rounds because they landed, according to UFC Stats, not that that is the most reliable source of anything, but it's the best we got. It's the best thing we have in terms of like our box rec, to use a boxing reference. But supposedly 6 strikes in the first round, 14-11, and then in the second round, 26-22. That was first one was for Keator, second one was for Emmett. So you're talking about, was that 36-37? So like very, very close. And there wasn't much in the way of non-significant strikes here. In fact, there was a total of 1. And 2 seconds of control time for Josh Emmett is irrelevant. I don't think it enters the scoring criteria in any way, shape, or form. I think Emmett had the harder shots, and that's why I gave him the first 2 rounds. But honestly, if you gave the first 2 rounds to Keator, I have no problem. I have no objection. He was landing, I think, the cleaner shots. I think he was landing the more accurate shots. I think he had the better timing. That's essentially what it comes down to. It's the classic Jeremy Stevens versus guys who actually get knockouts conundrum, where Emmett, playing the role of Jeremy Stevens, has the harder punches. Like, even if you block his punch, it forces you backwards. It causes pain. It's something that is unavoidable and deeply, deeply, deeply unpleasant to deal with. Whereas Keator, it's more, there's a little bit more snap on the punch. It's a little cleaner. It's a little sneakier. It's going to catch you when you're not necessarily expecting it. It's that classic example of which one of these is more likely to knock you out by like telling you, I am going to throw a right hook with this timing, and you can prepare to absorb the strike in any way, shape, or form that you want. Like, you're essentially a punching bag. Emmett is the one that's going to hurt more, but Keator is the one that's more likely to knock people out because he's the one that's going to, tell you, I'm going to throw a right hook, and then you get hit with the left uppercut. Emmett's are just like that much more telegraphed, predictable, visual, I guess. And at the end of the day, that was those 2 rounds. If you had it 2018 Keator, if you had it 1919, if you had it 2018 Emmett, like I did, these are all, I think, entirely viable scorecards. I think the third round is where we start getting an actual round winner. Keator apparently landed him 27-19 and 6 strikes in that round. I thought the gap appeared a little bit longer on the live watching. Felt like a little bit more. So that was, I thought, Emmett's round. And then the 4th and the 5th are undoubtedly Calvin Keator's rounds. They're the easiest ones. They're the absolute ones that I don't think that there's any way to score those for Emmett. So if you gave Emmett the first 3 rounds, like I did, he won the fight. If you gave round 1 or round 2 to Keator, or both, I think a 49-46 is actually entirely defensible. You're there. I do think the people that thought Keator won all 5 rounds are a little bit off their marker. Like, I do think that third round is Emmett's. But It's one of those weird ones. Like, I scored this fight for Emmett because it's scored round by round, but if I scored the fight overall, I would have given it to Keator. And that's why I can definitely feel like people feel like the wrong decision was made. Now, let's talk about the decision. Let's talk about it because it's what we're here for. We're here to talk about action, and this was part of it. If we pull up the Keator versus Emmett decision here, here's the problem. So Sal D'Amato scored the fight like I did. I have no objections. That's perfectly fine. Douglas Crosby scored the fight 48-47 for Keator. No problem there. He gave Keator the second, fourth, and fifth. I have no problem with that scorecard. Chris Lee, you are quickly making your way up on the completely nonsensical. So I'm going to slightly skip ahead here to the Oliveira DePaula fight that was earlier in the night that I disagreed with the scorecard for, but I thought it had an internal logic. In a nutshell, the two judges that scored that fight for Oliveira, and I'll talk about this in more detail when we get there, essentially were rewarding volume striking. They're not supposed to. Damage is supposed to be the king criteria. And I don't even think Oliveira was really landing volume striking because a lot of her strikes were being landed against the guard of DePaula. I'll talk about that again in more detail when we get to that fight. It'll probably be very short because I'm covering a lot of it here. But upon watching the fight, you could see what the judges were scoring. So even though the judges got the wrong winner, in my opinion, I think you could defend it upon appeal, which I do wish we had more of. I've said this repetitively. People talk about the criteria, open scoring, and so on, about how to improve scoring in MMA. I think at the end of the day, accountability and the ability to actually appeal a fight is the answer. And that's the thing is, I would like Chris Lee to, at some point with his job on the line, again, not necessarily the first scorecard would get you to this point, but at some point, explain his criteria here. Because Chris Lee scored this fight round 1, 3, and 4 for Emmett. Now, again, using Ufc Stats, not the greatest thing in the world. I know. Calvin Keator outlanded Josh Emmett 41-21 in the fourth round. It was the biggest strike gap of the fight. It was almost 2-1. 20 strikes difference between the two. Keator also hurt Emmett in the fourth round. He staggered him with a punch. It was the closest thing we had to a ending point of the fight. Wasn't that close. I'm not, but in the grand scheme of things, it was the biggest punch of the fight, the most notable offense of the fight, while outlanding him almost 2-1. And here's the thing. If you were to score all of these rounds for Emmett, okay, there's an inherent logic if you just think Emmett hits that much harder than Keator. That one punch from Emmett is worth 2 punches from Keator, essentially. But that's not what he did. He scored the 5th round for Keator, which was a worse round for Keator. He scored the 2nd round for Keator, which was a worse round for Keator. That's the problem. If they're here's the list of order of how these rounds should go for Keator. The 4th was his best round. The 5th was his second best round. The 3rd was next, or the 2nd was next. The 1st, then the 3rd. There is no scorecard that should be 2 and 5 for Keator. There is no scorecard where Keator shouldn't get the 4th round unless your supposition was the wrong one, but the at least internally logically correct one of Emmett landing a punch is worth 2 punches from Keator. That's the only way to get that score. So, once again, Chris Lee proving himself to be one of the absolute worst judges in the business. And he will continue to get judging gigs. I don't understand it. I don't get it. It takes a lot for me to look at Sal D'Amato's scorecard and go, wow, Sal D'Amato is way more competent than any other judge. Because for a long time, for a long, long time, the absolute bottom of the barrel judging was Sal D'Amato, Adelaide Bird, Cecil Peoples. It was those three people. There were other bad judges, but those three had Mount Rushmore bad judging locked. And Chris Lee is on the charge for that absolute GOAT status of bad judges. Because this is not the first time. It's not the first time. Almost every time Chris Lee judges, there's nothing there. There is no inherent consistency. Like, he took this fight, which I legitimately think you could score 48-46 Keator, 48-47 Keator, 48-47 Emmett. 3 possible scorecards with 3 rounds that could go, or with 2 rounds that could absolutely go either way you want to sell it. A 3rd round that I think probably has to go to Emmett, but like even that is close. And then like a 5th round that I feel like has to go to Keator, but even that is close. And then the 4th round. The 4th round is the only round that under no circumstances should not be unanimous. And yet, here we are. I don't get it. In terms of scores from the media members, excuse me, a little bit of snot there. Emmett won on a bunch of cards. Keator won on a bunch of cards. 48-47s either way would seem to be like really, really acceptable. Sherdog's Ben Duffy gave it 48, 49, 46 Keator. Perfectly defensible scorecard, I think. Take away Chris Lee giving the 4th round to Emmett, and we have ourselves a fairly non-controversial, because of the nature of it, fight, despite the fact that you could go all over the place with the scorecard. So, like, congratulations, Chris Lee. You gave the only scorecard that doesn't make any sense. In terms of what's next for these guys, nothing really changed about my opinion of them here. Like, Emmett's still a power striker who's still probably a little bit too predictable for his own good. Keator, I think, wilted a little bit here. Like, I don't think he was active enough. Even if you scored the fight for Keator, I think if you look at the activity that Keator had against even like a Max Holloway, now granted, Holloway forces that pace on you to a certain degree, but this was one of the lower pace fights that I think I've seen from Keator. And I don't know if it was that he felt Emmett's power and didn't really want to overly engage with him. Maybe that was the case. I don't know. But there wasn't enough kicking. There wasn't enough volume to comfortably win the fight. And that's the thing with Josh Emmett, when you're fighting Josh Emmett or anyone of a Josh Emmett type who has highly respected power and whose power is very visible, you are going to have to pour the volume on. You are going to have to make it a quantity versus quality debate in the head of the judges, or you need to hurt him on the counter. And I'm still very bizarrely, I'm quite amazed actually that Josh Emmett does not get countered more frequently, because there's a pretty large counter window open there. There really, really is, with his predictability and honestly a little bit of an over windup that he tends to do on his punches. So it's very surprising that Keator, who does have some good counters, didn't do anything with that, and that it seems to be something that people don't really do a lot of. Like, his power must be that not consciously scary, not oh my god, this is the end of the world when he hits me, but definitely it's got to put like that little hesitation. That's the word I'm looking for. That little hesitation in everyone's mind when they're striking with him, because it does keep happening. What's next for Emmett is... All right, so Josh Emmett should get the title shot unless the following happens. That is, Volkanovski beats Max Holloway, and Yair Rodriguez beats, in impressive fashion, Brian Ortega. Because I think if Rodriguez goes out there and like styles on Ortega, and Volkanovski retains the title, that's the title fight you end up making, because Rodriguez probably will have a little more heat on him than Emmett does after this win. And both of those matchups with Volkanovski are fresh meat. Now, If Ortega wins, then Emmett gets a title shot because we've seen Ortega versus both of those guys. We've not seen Emmett against either of them. Now, to be clear, I think Emmett's going to get eaten alive by both of them. I think that Holloway can do similar to what Keator did here, only he is actually going to pour the volume on. And I think Volkanovski will absolutely shut him down with like his own counter game. Mind you, here's the thing. I thought Keator would. I thought Keator would do that. Now, Volkanovski is much, much better than Keator as a counter striker and just like in general, a complete MMA fighter. But there is the fact that despite me really thinking that Emmett is highly counterable and highly shutdownable for pretty much his entire UFC career, that it really has not happened. Even when he's lost, it's not really been what has actually happened. If we look at his losses, there's the Jeremy Stevens one where he broke his eye socket. And there's the Des Green one where Des Green did what Des Green does, which is Des Green is very physical and kind of like just this absolutely neutralizing wrestling presence. So like no one's actually beaten Emmett the way that I really thought he would get beat. So there is that. There is that, I guess. But I don't really have tremendous hopes for him in a title shot. But I still want to see him get it. I mean, the man is 37 years old. He's towards the end of what you would consider to be a prime career, particularly at featherweight. So, you know, give him his title shot. Let him have happy. It's fresh meat. And it's not like there's anyone else. Like I mean, Volkanovski and Holloway are so entrenched as the 1A, 1B of this division that it's not like there's anyone out there that I think is going to beat them. Like we've seen, like Ortega is probably the next best featherweight, and he got mauled by both of them. Like that is the point we're at. But anyways, onwards to and for Calvin Kattar, I put here that I would love to see him fight the zombie. It's the only fight that really makes sense for him off of a loss. Like everyone else in that top of the division is kind of coming off wins or whatever. I mean, obviously you could do the loser of Yair versus Ortega. You could do, that's really it. I mean, you got the loser of Yair Ortega, or you got Zombie. And I think Zombie is the funner fight of the bunch. Although, we'll say, if Rodriguez loses, that's a tempting fight as well. Calvin Kattar versus Yair Rodriguez would be real fun, I think. But those are the two options on the table as far as I see it. But obviously, it also depends on timetables and so on. So, Kevin Holland versus Tim Means. The fight went largely as I expected it to go. Holland is an incredibly long fighter, incredibly powerful striker, a creative striker, and he fights at like a pretty good pace. Still is a completely garbage wrestler. I was watching this with Byron and Javier, and Byron's like refrain of the night with this fight was, and Tim Means completely accidentally takes down Kevin Holland, because that's how bad his wrestling is. And it's truly bizarre because, I mean, you would think that training with Travis Lutter, who's a pretty good wrestler, actually. I mean, think about Travis Lutter back in the day, fighting Trevor Prangley and fighting Matt Lindland, and doing a pretty good job of not just getting out-wrestled. Now, he lost both those fights. He was inevitably out-wrestled, but he made it very difficult. So it's just kind of weird that, like, his star protege, Kevin Holland, is so bad at it. So very bad at it. Like, you're in Texas, my man. Go find a wrestling school. Like, Jesus. I don't understand. I don't get it at all. They were saying like maybe he learned when he was talking with Habib while getting mauled by I think it was Brunson, but it might have been Vittori, but it was one of the two where they were just taking him down at will and like completely boning him. And he was like, Habib, what do I do? And like the commentary treats that as like an eye-opening moment. It's not. He just went down to 170 and still is getting out wrestled by guys who aren't really that good of wrestlers. Like okay, yeah. He hasn't had it done to him what Vittori and Brunson did, but Brunson's a really good wrestler and really physical. Vittori is a simpler wrestler, but also very, very physical. And he's down a weight class, and still, like, Oliveira, when he was able to wrestle with him, was able to take him down, and Means, when he was able to wrestle with him, was able to take him down. And that gap is still 100% there. He's dangerous on the ground. He got the Darce choke here. He's dangerous on the feet. Like, I like everything about his game, but, like, I don't know how far you can go with a massive hole in your wrestling. I just don't. I don't know how reliable it is that he can just keep, like, submitting people from bottom or knocking people out from bottom or whatever, or, like, being a dangerous bottom guy in this sport is just inherently limiting. I mean, it's not quite that simple, because, like, Holland's offensive wrestling is actually fairly decent. Like, he can take other people down. He can control other people. That was kind of his gimmick when he came in. Like, call people who wrestled me pussies, but, like, when I do it, I'm a genius. And I don't know. It's so bizarre. It's so weird. It's a gap in his game that just shouldn't be there. For next fights, I want to see him fight Nico Price. I don't think it really actually fits, because I don't think it's much of a step up from Tim Means necessarily, and I think it's maybe actually a lower profile fight, even though Price did beat Means. But it's the fight I want to see, because it's one of the few guys at welterweight that is going to give him a reach question. I think he has a similar reach. And he's got the power to, like, kind of make it interesting on the feet. Like, it's just a really interesting fight. And as long as I think that there's this massive gap in Holland's game, I'm just not really comfortable treating him as a contender. And for Tim Means, I wrote down here Andre Fiallo, because I think that would be a fun fight. I think Means would win that fight. I think that Fiallo's style plays into him well, but, like, at the same time, I really want to see Fiallo make some adjustments, and forcing him into a fight where his style is actually probably a bad idea is, I think, a really good idea in that regard. I think it's a good idea for him, because I've said this kind of repetitively. I think that Fiallo, for his confidence level and his mentality, actually has a terrible style for himself. I think he has the durability. I think he has the physicality for it. But I think he has too much hesitation in his game. And maybe this would be a chance to make him do other things. So there's that. After that, we had Buckley versus Duraiev. And this fight, I hate to, like, pat my own chest here, because I did lose some fights here. I was wrong on some fights. There is one fight we're going to get to where I'm horribly off base. But this was a fight that kind of went like I expected it to. I mean, Duraiev can get takedowns. He does have a lot of physical ability, but at the same time, he's just limited on the striking aspect of things, and very open. I think he's very defensive. He's a defensive sieve, and Buckley wasn't consistently making him pay necessarily, because Buckley's own striking game is not, like, built on, like, tremendous process and consistency. But, like, every time that an opening was there and Buckley capitalized, he hurt Duraiev pretty badly. I think the highlight was probably actually, and this might have been an illegal kick. They didn't give me a replay to look at it, but Duraiev goes for a takedown and gets head kicked. Like, that was really, really impressive. Like, Buckley's a freak. Buckley's an absolute freak. He has an amazing amount of physicality. He's a guy who's 5'10", who I absolutely don't actually have a problem with fighting at 185. Like, that's the kind of physicality we're talking about here. Like, guy lost to Kevin Holland, who is now a weight class below him, was physically outmatched by that, but, like, is incredibly physical. He's got amazing coordination. He's explosive. He's got great balance. He's got an inherent ability to kind of do everything about MMA. Like, he's got an inherent ability to wrestle. He's got an inherent ability to strike. And yet technically is a little bit thin. And that's probably because he's with a really small camp, and he's with Detroit Survival Guy, and I mean, there is obviously some limitations to his training environment, but dude's done a good job of promoting himself, He's even said like the whole Detroit survival guy thing is like trying to be like, hey, UFC, you won't promote me, so I guess I have to do the heavy lifting on like every fight I have, which is sad because again, and I've said this a number of times about a number of different fighters' relationship with the UFC, your fight promoters, how are you not promoting this guy? This guy gave you one of the greatest knockouts of all time with that ninja kick against Impa Kasanganay, and you can't promote him. My God, what is wrong with you? Anyways, nothing terribly surprising about the fight. Buckley is still like kind of not tremendously well structured, and that's why I have. But at the same time, I kind of want to move him up in that division. That division's a bit thin, and the winner of Dricus du Plessis versus Brad Tavares, which I do kind of think is going to be Brad Tavares, because Dricus du Plessis is kind of like in the same boat as Buckley in the sense that like there's a lot of like X factor to his game, but not a lot of process. So, it's the same kind of boat here. But like I love that fight. And for Duraiev, I don't know what to do with him because he still has a lot of physicality to him that like could turn into something. How old is he? Because like, I might be thinking he's older than he is just because of the lack of hair. 33 years old. Okay, so he's not super young. He's not super old either. I penciled in here Dushko Todorovic. It's not that I love that fight, but it's a fight between two guys who like have some physical ability, but like have a game that lacks an A game, that lacks a like strong technical aspect to it. So might as well. Like maybe one of them is more than meets the eye, but I don't know. You're gonna hear a click as I adjust the chair. There we go. Anyways, moving on up in the world. Damir Ismagulov versus Guram Kuchaladze. This was a controversial decision a little bit. A lot of people thought Guram won, and I have no issue with that. Guram, I thought, fought really, really well. Let's pull up the UFC stats just to have some numbers to look at here. Guram won the first round. I think that's obvious. The second round went to Damir. I think that's obvious. The third round, that went to Damir, I think, on the scorecards in general. Let's have a look at the scoring here. Douglas Crosby gave Ismagulov the second, gave the first and third to Kutuladze. That was the one that Kutuladze won, and then Chris Lee gave the second and the third to Damir, and the first to Kutuladze. That's fine. Jason Staffen gave the first round to Damir and gave all the rounds to Damir. So in the pattern of the night, Sal Diamato, you need to thank Chris Lee for making you look like a competent judge, and and Chris Lee, you need to thank Jason Statham for making you look like a competent judge, because I don't really know. Like that first round was the only round that I think absolutely has to go one way. I think that absolutely was Guram's round. He landed better volume. He landed better shots. He hurt Ismagulov in the fight. While I'm on this fight, what is the deal with Ismagulov doing the wink thing? Did he have something in his eye? We were thinking like maybe Vaseline got in there or something. Or is that something like a Tourette syndrome type deal? Because we're debating that. I haven't noticed him doing that before. So, and as someone who does have Tourette syndrome, I can say that the twitches and the signs of something like that are inherently brought out by stress. So it is entirely possible that this was just like a way more stressful fight, which it should be, because Kuchaladze is a scary dude. Now, granted, Ismagulov fought Joel Alvarez, who is a pretty scary dude now, but at the time, I don't think we really had the same thoughts on the matter. I think the first round's definitely Kuchaladze's. He landed more. Ismagulov, I think, definitely takes the second round, but I will say this, it's entirely fair to be like, Ismagulov doesn't hit as hard as Kuchaladze. Like, 100% fair. Kutadladze really loads up on all of his strikes, and I think also just has a little bit more natural power in general. Dude is built like a brick shithouse. Super powerful. Like, he does have the Josh Emmett factor to him. And so I could even totally see that one going to him. And then in the third on the stats page looks like it should have gone to Guram, but like at the same time, watching it live, I did score it for Damir. So if you thought Guram won, no objections. I think the 1 and 3 to Guram, totally legitimate scorecard. I think 2 and 3 to Damir, also totally legitimate scorecard. And I think Damir is... I think for Damir, the problem is that this did show up that maybe there is just a limit to his physicality, though, because I think he's a cleaner striker. I think he's a cleaner grappler. I think he's a smoother fighter just in general. But Guram, through raw physicality and power, was able to keep this fight very, very close and arguably win it. And dude's a freak. It really does change my thoughts on him as a... I don't know if it really changes my thoughts on his fighter, because I already knew he was a freak. So that's not new. But it does suggest that his freakish levels, because I thought the Gamrot matchup was a little bit friendly to him. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these people I had Guram all day against Gamrot. Gamrot was a ridiculous overdog. No, I thought Gamrot would win. But looking back and looking at lens of Kutadladze after the fight, it was kind of obvious what elements of the game functioned for him against Gamrot. And this time, he took a guy who doesn't present those openings and still made the fight exceedingly difficult. I still kind of want to send him down the ranks a little bit to get some hype on him. So I put Joe Zaleski as his opponent. And for Ismagulov, I am going with the winner of Drakkar Klose and Carlos Diego Ferreira, because I think in the case of Klose, you have some similar physicality to Guram, and particularly with a clinch-based style, which will be interesting to see how he handles that. And with Ferreira, you have a guy who's a really, really good grappler. And that's kind of the thing with Ismagulov, is that when he's striking with people, he kind of has that back pocket that I can just take you down and do work there. And it kind of accentuates his grappling, makes him feel a little bit more comfortable maybe. And against Ferreira, that might be taken away. So both of those super interesting fights for me, for what Damir can actually do, because it's kind of weird. He won this fight in my opinion, but at the same time, it did bring out a lot of thoughts about where he's just hard capped at lightweight, because lightweight, it's a deep ass world, man. Gregory Rodriguez, Julian Marquez. I don't have a lot to say about this. Marquez lost because he's defensively a sieve. He's incredibly vulnerable to getting lit up. Was lit up. Doesn't really necessarily have an A game. And to be clear with all this, I'm actually a fan of Julian Marquez in the case. Now, out of the case, he's a little cringe. Because, number one, there was the whole Taylor Swift call out after a fight for a date or a phone number. I don't remember what it was now. But it was ridiculous. It was silly. And then there's also the fact that he seems to actually get offended at podcasters and stuff like that. So, if he's listening to this right now, to my knowledge, he never has, probably never will. This is a super small podcast, super small audience. But if he did, he probably would get offended by what I'm saying, and that's a bit weird. It's a bit weird when I say I love watching him fight, but he is an absolute sloppy mess. But he fights like someone who knows he's a big sloppy mess. The Sam Alvey fight was the best example of that, where it's he's going to fight the exact wrong fight for Sam Alvey, but he's probably going to win it. And then he did. And this one is the case where okay, fighting a big old sloppy fight didn't work. And, he's a super fun action fighter, but there's not much else to say. For Rodriguez, the disappointing loss to Petrosian really did take a lot of shine off of him, but man is still a good power striker, and he's still very deadly on the ground. So there's a lot to build on there. I put Anthony Hernandez as his next opponent, and for Marquez, I really want this fight. I never knew until I saw their names near each other in the Tapology rankings that I needed this fight. But I need Julian Marquez versus Nick Maximoff, because Nick Maximoff is the ultimate in hitch control, grappler, and Marquez is living chaos incarnate. I need that fight. I need that fight in my life. Um, and I don't need Nick Maximoff fighting anyone else. So please make that happen. Um, moving on. Adrian Yanez versus Tony Kelly, which was probably the most hyped up fight on the night. Because of out of the cage stuff. Of course, Tony Kelly with the dirty Brazilian comment, and again, you can take that as racist or based in some fact or what he really meant about it. But like, my problem with it wasn't even that. Like, I appreciate that MMA fighters and corners and whatever are going to say things in the heat of the moment that they probably wouldn't say otherwise, and that they are also people who have poor impulse control a lot of the time. This is what leads to them fighting in a cage for our entertainment. But the problem is that he went the cancel culture route. Like, that's the problem. Like, and I've explained this a number of times before, but I think it's going to come up anytime it is appropriate. The whole cancel culture thing, kind of stupid, because here's the thing. You weren't canceled. He still has the super hot girlfriend, Andrea Lee, which is the most interesting thing going on in his life, I'm sure. He still had this fight with Adrian Yanez. He probably won't get cut, and if he does get cut, it's because he missed weight for this fight and weighed in at 137.5. Let's be honest. And he hasn't been cut for being an anti-vaxxer. Like, so for all the things that he has claimed cancel culture for, he hadn't actually been canceled for it. His life is the same. In fact, I've argued with a number of people repetitively that this fight with Adrian Yanez became higher profile because of his stupidity. And he actually benefited from it. So how can you be canceled when your star is on the rise, so to speak? But anyways, yeah, he got slept here. And this was a bad stoppage because it went on a little bit too long, and also the referee like kicked Kelly in the back of the head while trying to stop the fight. The fight itself went largely. It started a little bit slower than I thought it would, and I think that was actually a bad idea for Kelly, because I thought the only thing Kelly really could do was force a extreme pace and extreme volume exchange on Yanez, but maybe because he didn't make weight, or maybe because he felt Yanez's power and didn't really want a piece of it. I don't know. Probably the weight is more likely. He kind of fought at a pace that did get to a nice rolling boil. Eventually, rolling boil, I should say. But yeah, he fought it. He kind of fought at a pace that Yanez was super comfortable at, and I'm not really sure anyone really should want to fight Yanez at that pace. Yanez is like really dangerous. He's got really smooth boxing techniques. He's got good power in his hands. I still worry about his like overall wrestling game and like physicality, if you could force like a clinch and wrestling game onto him. But that's not really Kelly's game. Kelly's just kind of like Julian Marquez actually in the previous fight, where it's like it's a lot of chaos. And although Kelly does feel more like controlled, directed chaos, whereas Marquez is just here we go, having a good time. Yeah, he couldn't get the job done, and he needs to fight a Brazilian. Like, if you're not going to cut him, this whole thing's going to hold over him. Like, you might as well do him versus Ronnie Barcelos. And for Yanez, I know Kyler Phillips lost to Raleigh and Paiva, and that really kind of really put him in the back seat in terms of like hype. But I want that fight. Still want that fight. Like, Phillips represents a guy who I think is in some ways a step above physically than Yanez, and it would be a really fun fight, and I think it would be a proven fight for both guys. I think that would be phenomenal. Like that fight. This is the first card in a while I've actually had really, really strong opinions on a lot of where the fight should go. Natalie Silva versus Jasmine Jasudavicius. I have nothing really to say about this fight other than I was horrendously wrong. I thought Jasudavicius should have been one of the biggest favorites on the card. I thought Silva really had shown very little other than a very opportunistic strike or a submission game in her previous fights. Now, granted, I hadn't seen a lot of them, but it does seem like even the people who liked Silva are really, really shocked by this performance. So that does make me feel a little bit better that a fighter that I wasn't super familiar with apparently did just take a massive step forward here. She looks incredibly quick. She has good footwork. She picks her strikes very well. She's creative about it. She was lighting Jasmine up the entire time, who gets a big thumbs up for hard work and trying to adjust. Like, that's the other thing. Like, I liked that Jasmine tried to do different things. But this fight was also a bit of an indictment of like the open scoring idea that people have. And again, I've said this. I am neither pro nor against open scoring. But people are acting like, all right, so open scoring. You know you're down 2 rounds. You're going to go out there and you're going to perform great. You're going to suddenly solve the puzzle and get that knockout and that big finish. And it's like, okay, Jasmine just tried to do that and it ended up being like actually probably the worst round of the fight. Like, that's kind of what you're going to get a lot of. Like, if someone's ahead 2 rounds, there's kind of a reason they are. And it kind of usually, probably like 4 times out of 5, means that someone just doesn't really have the adjustments for them. And like Jasmine tried to make the adjustments here, couldn't get it done, got beaten. Natalie Silva looks like a really interesting prospect, kind of out of nowhere. I've got her penciled in against Ariane Lipski because, not that, like, I think Lipski's actually an easier fight than Jasmine, so it's not really a step up. But Lipski has like a little bit of profile that Jasmine doesn't have. And I mean, you might as well slow boil this a little bit. Like, you know, get her hyped up a little bit. Because she apparently came up with some transformation changes here. Let's see what she does given more time. And for Jasmine, heartbreak. I've got her against the winner of Victoria Leonardo versus Mandy Baum. They're 2 girls who are essentially fighting for their jobs. And Jasmine's now 1-1, and her win over Kay Hansen is aging a little bit poorly after Hansen lost to Piera Rodriguez. So, kind of give her a chance to rebuild. I think there's still a lot of physicality there. I think there's a lot of fight IQ there, too, as well. And I think her corner gave her some excellent tactical advice. She just couldn't implement it the way they would have wanted to. So, it was in certain ways, despite losing 30-27 quite clearly, it was actually not bad. It was there were positives to take out of it. Jeremiah Wells slapped Court McGee. I don't have a lot to say. Court McGee is kind of at that point where, like, is the durability gone? I don't know. Wells hits really, really hard. I changed my thought on this after doing the podcast, where I thought that I had originally picked Wells, and then I went back on that. Jeremiah Wells versus Eliza Zaleski, and I've been calling for this fight for ages, and I'm going to keep calling for it. Court McGee versus Matt Brown. Make it happen. There you go. And then Ricardo Ramos did a spinning elbow knockout of Danny Chavez. I can't say that I'm surprised anymore. Ramos is really, really good at spinning elbows. And that's kind of all I really have to say about that. I'll go deeper. Dude has all the physical talent in the world that you need to be a really, really good fighter. He just needs to put things together on a consistent basis. And I would love to see him fight the winner of Bill Algeo and Billy Quarantillo, or Tio. Tio or Till, I forget which. It's one or the other. I think it's Tillo. I will say that that fight would be like an interesting example, because both of those are guys who fight at a pretty high pace. They'll test your cardio, and they're pretty smart fighters. Although Algeo's political thoughts are a bit weird, and by this I don't mean that he's a conservative, because there's at any UFC card you're probably got 3/4 conservative fighters. So like, that's not weird. What's weird is like he goes into like conspiracy theories that are unique to Bill Algeo, which is pretty funny. But at the same time scary. Yeah, I would love that fight. That's the type of thing that would test Ramos. And then for Chavez, I don't really have much. If Tucker Lutz is still on contract, they're kind of close to each other in the Tapology rankings. Make it happen. Like, Chavez still has some good physicality. He's got pretty reasonable P's and Q's. I was listening to the Vivisection, and they kind of really disagree with me on that like he actually has a lot of hitches in his game. I kind of agree. Like, I kind of agree that there's a lot of hitches in his game where the transitioning isn't amazing, and also he does tend to throw kicks and then back off and then like still throw kicks. and that can be a little bit messy. But I think the basics are there to have a pretty good fight against like low brand fighters. Maria Oliveira versus Gloria de Palma. This one, so this one I already more or less talked about in the sense that I said that I scored it personally rounds 1 and 2 to DePaula, and I think, frankly, the third probably should have also gone to DePaula. All the judges gave the first round to Oliveira, and 2 of them gave her the third round. I don't necessarily have a problem with the third round. That was not a particularly good round for either lady. I get the internal logic that Oliveira landed more strikes in the first round, but then DePaula landed more strikes in the third round. And also, like, to be honest, the first round, despite that being the one where Oliveira landed the most strikes, I thought that was a bad round. Because I termed it on Twitter Bart Simpson style striking, where she would come forward and just throw these arm short punches, and they would all land on DePaula's arms. And I swear that was like most of her volume was just blocked. And I'm not saying that a blocked strike can't have value. Gabriel Gonzaga breaking Randy Couture's arm, for example. But like, you have to have power on it. And am I the only one that thinks Oliveira throws with incredibly little power? Like, it's all arm punches. So if it's blocked, I just kind of ignore it. I'm not going to get terribly worked up about it because DePaula's not a particularly great fighter. I think that she didn't make some relatively obvious adjustments in this fight. It's kind of like her Belbita fight, where she will kind of just beat her head against the wall, doing the same thing over and over again. The only difference is that in the Belbita fight, one, I think Belbita is a much better fighter than Oliveira is, but two, at least she came out with like a different game plan than what she had used previously. Like, there were new wrinkles to display. She had like no adaptation in the fight itself, but like her base game plan was like a little bit different. And this fight didn't even really have that. It did have an all-female corner for DePaula. This may come off as a bit sexist, but I'm going to say it. I think that's a bad idea. Now, to be clear, I don't think that's a bad idea because you couldn't possibly have an all-female corner that would work. But just the depth in women's martial arts, and particularly with women's coaches, it's hard to think of that. It's hard to think that the best idea for you is actually an all-female corner. Like, they tried to hype it up that Mayra Buena Silva was in there. And they're apparently together. Didn't know that. But Mayra Buena Silva is like all physicality and no real fight IQ. So why? Like, okay, like that's the thing. You're already using up a spot on your girlfriend. That's fine. Emotional, mental support is key. But then you really need to make the most out of your other corner spots, and I don't think she is. And to be clear, like, I kind of said this, a lot of the same things about having Pat Barry and Rose Namajunas' corner. I just think that you should be looking for the best corner possible, and unless you're going to pull out, I can never remember her name, but her nickname is Riptide. She's a really good coach. She's one of the old school women's MMA pioneers. She does a great job of coaching. Or you pull out like a Angela Hill. Angela Hill could work. Like, there are women definitely worth having in your corner, but like, it just feels like at any gym you go to in the world, the chances that your honestly best corner is all female is unlikely. So at least right now, it's obviously getting better, but like right now, it feels like that's not a great idea. So that was kind of, I don't know, the interesting thing about this fight. And I will say some nice things about Oliveira. She did fight, I think, better on the way through. Obviously, her first round was technically her best according to the judges, and also was the fight that she landed the round that she landed the most volume in. But I thought that her striking actually started to look just more technical, more effective as the fight went on. So at least there was good adjustments going on. Even if I'm not interested to see either girl fight really again, I put Oliveira here against the winner of Ducati and Jessica Pena, and DePaula versus Elise Reed might be fairly interesting, fun. It might be a fight that Elise Reed can win with her pretty limited physicality. So, yeah, go do that, I guess. And, excuse me. Moving on, Cody Stamann beat Eddie Wineland. Wineland retiring after the fight, I think, and that's good. I don't really have much more else to say. I mean, it was a first-round knockout for Cody Stamann, who's a notoriously non-finishing fighter. He's a notorious kind of dude who neutralizes and just fights a really smart and safe fight. And he went out there and kind of just put the screws to him. It's not a great sign. So, yeah, Wineland retiring feels right. He's apparently a full-time firefighter, so presumably he has some level of financial game planning and plan for the future, I hope. And for Stamann, he's still good. I mean, lost 3 in a row, but it was still really, really good fighters. I have him penciled in here against Tony Gravely. I think that would not necessarily be a great fight, but I don't think many fights with Gravely in them are great. Like, Gravely is a guy who hits really hard, kind of does a little bit of everything, actually has a pretty good wrestling game, but honestly kind of gasses himself out doing it. So, like, hey, why not? I'm not super excited for that matchmaking, but it is what it is. Phil Haas versus Darren Wynn. The only judging thing I can say here is only one judge gave it a 10-9 first or 10-8 first round for Haas. Haas beat Wynn up badly in the first round, like enough that Twitter and like the people I was watching with at this point was just me and Byron. We're talking about like, do you throw the towel in? Like, that's how bad it was. And it doesn't really make me feel any better about Phil Haas as a fighter because Phil Haas is perfectly capable if you don't make him really think. If you don't make him have to make adjustments or really go deep into skill sets. If you're just there to get hit with the same basic combinations over and over again, like Phil Haas was, or like Deron Wynn was, he's fine. He's got a lot of physicality. He's got good power. He's got good speed. He's got actually pretty good striking technique. He just doesn't adapt all that well. And it kind of showed when he got caught by Chris Curtis, is like, if you can just make it kind of messy and kind of unpredictable, you can disrupt kind of everything Phil Haas does. But if you're Deron Wynn and you really can't make any of that happen, you're going to get lit up. And he got lit up repetitively. I don't have much more to say about that fight. But yeah, Wynn's super tough guy. Super tough. Wynn versus Malkoun is the only thing that really makes sense. And I want Phil Haas versus like Shabazian because Shabazian still kind of holds a reasonably decent ranking spot. I think he's top 15 and for the UFC. And I think you put him in there with Shabazian. Shabazian's a guy who has a lot of the same problems in the sense that, like, he has a game plan. He has a shallow set of combinations and power wrestling to go to. And we see who comes out on top. And who can be, like, kind of, like, moved up in the world, really. It's just, it's kind of frustrating because Haas definitely has all the physical talent in the world to be a really good fighter. I just don't trust his decision-making when under pressure. And that does kind of limit you. And then we have Roman Dolidze knocked out Daukaus. I was wrong about this fight in a nutshell. I thought that Daukaus's more well-rounded game, better striking, better grappling, I thought better wrestling would be enough to counteract the raw physicality Dolidze and the sort of actually reasonably good clinch wrestling he has and clinch control game that he has. And Dolidze went out there and just said, no, my man, no, if you're going to clinch with me, I'm going to knock you silly. And he did. Well, he knocked him silly before clinching, actually. It was a kind of a panic desperation clinch. Not a lot to break down here. It was a heck of a knockout. It was really cool. It was a good way to start the fight card. And Delize got the job done. I put Delize against maybe Brendan Allen. I'm a little sour on Brendan Allen. I thought he beat Jacob Malkoun and got a deserved decision. It was the sort of performance that, like, I was kind of on the Brendan Allen hype train of, like, all right, Malkoun's a perfect dude to look really good against. And he didn't. And then, there is no and then, I guess. But I guess, throw him in there with Delize, see what he does with someone who's got some power and some clinch wrestling, who probably will still bring a similar fight to him with less dimensionality, but more physicality. And we'll see what happens. And for Daukaus, I don't know how to matchmake Daukaus. Like, that's the problem, is, like, dude went in there with Kevin Holland, was winning before the headbutt, and has kind of, like, gotten absolutely no love from the matchmakers since, and now he has a loss. So what do you do with that? And, like, the problem with him is that, like, I don't know that there's, like, such a thing as, like, a safe fight for Daukaus, because he's not particularly amazing physically in general. Like, he's just kind of okay. And the fact that he doesn't have any safety in his game because he really will not avoid an opponent's strengths means that there's a chance that he will beat guys, like, very high in the division, and there's a chance that he will lose to dudes near the bottom. And it's just kind of weird. I don't know who you match him against. I have no idea. I don't know how to approach it. And I don't know how the matchmakers see him. So, nice night. Everyone who got a finish got a bonus. That's pretty cool. That's pretty nice. Fight of the night, I think, went to Emmett and Kattar, which I don't necessarily agree with. But I guess everything else was kind of like a lot of first round finishes. Like, let's see here, 2 first round finishes, 3 first round finishes, 4 first round finishes, 5 first round, 6. There were 6 first round finishes, and the ones that went beyond the first round were Haas and Win, which was a one-sided ass whooping, so that's not a fight of the night candidate. And also, officially, Buckley versus Duraiev went 10 seconds into the third round, but I really take that as a doctor stoppage at the end of the second, frankly, and then Means went to the second round against Holland. I don't know. I guess it probably is actually the answer. I personally enjoyed Kutal versus Ismagulov a little bit more, but it's not actually that much of a problem. I do feel kind of bad for Natalie Silva, who had a hell of a performance, and will not get a performance of the night bonus or anything. One of the few winners on the card that did not get anything. It was kind of interesting to see Jacob Montalvo and Kerry Hatley back in the refereeing festivities. And then Herb Dean had some bad stoppages, but the Jeremiah Wells Court McGee one kind of coming to mind with, like, just not good positioning. And then, I don't know, like, I thought that the Win versus Haas fight should have been stopped earlier, but that's just me. So, and then what else happened here in the world of MMA? We had the PFL card. Let me pull that up. Jeremy Stevens was on the card. That'll do it. Heathen Jeremy Stevens, who got a split decision win over Miles Price. I still haven't gone back and watched that one. This card was a little bit disappointing for me. Not that the fights were bad, but, like, the person I had rooting it, the 2 people I had rooting interest in, Theodoros Atstoulis and Victor Pesta, both lost in very convincing fashion. And in Pesta's case, I'm really worried because it just seems like he has no durability whatsoever. And then, like, the loss against Omar Akhmedov is also disappointing, but understandable. Olivier Aubin-Mercier won. Shoeface won. Alex Martinez got a controversial split decision over Clay Collard. I'm not as anti it as some people are, but I did think Collard won that fight. And yeah, that's about all I have to really say about the card. Delon Monte won. Big knockout over Emiliano Sordi. That was a good win. And Josh Silvara is maybe a guy to look out for because he got a head kick to knees in the clinch, which is pretty cool knockout. Pretty cool knockout against Martin Hamlet. Or Martin Hamlet. So they're going on to the next round of PFL. Yeah, it was a good action card. It just was kind of soiled a little bit for me by the fact that the two guys I was really, really invested in going places and showing me something that I had put a little bit of emphasis on when they came into the big show, so to speak. In Pestis' case, the UFC. In Otstulis's case, the Risen GP tournament. It really was like, these are guys that are going to do something, and it really didn't pay out. And in Pestis' case, I thought like second chance of life at 205. It's also not really paying out. So there you go. And there was also KSW. That was a good card. I don't really have any like super suggestions, but like the card in general was pretty good. If you got time, go check it out. And yeah, it was a good weekend of fights. We've had two really good offerings from the UFC in a row. We got PFL 5 coming up. We got Bellator 282, and we got another UFC fight night next week. So in the PFL, you've got Anthony Pettis fighting against Stevie Ray. Kind of looking forward to Chris Wade versus Kyle Bochniak. Could be an interesting fight. Not necessarily one that I'm thinking is going to be like a super crowd pleaser, but it could be one of those nerd technical fights that I do really, really like. Bellator's got Gegard Mousasi versus Johnny Eblen. I don't know. Maybe Eblen's got something that for him. He is undefeated. He has looked good, but like, so did Austin Vanderford, and he got wrecked. Ego versus Sabatelli in the GP, as well as Barzola versus Magomedov. I'll be watching that. It's fun. Anyone else? Any kind of sleeper fights here that like really look good? Well, Alejandro Lara always looks good, but that's a whole different story. Hey, Aaron Jeffrey's on the card. Okay. I'm hyped for that. I'm hyped for Aaron Jeffrey on the card. Met him. Cool dude. And then on the UFC, you got kind of a really ho-hum main event. Gamrot versus Saryukian. Like, it's a very interesting fight for a main event. It does feel kind of crap. Neil Magny versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. I'm looking forward to that. The rest of the card. I mean, Umar Nurmagomedov is on there. That's fun. Chris Curtis is a wild man. I'm always down to see him fight. But there's not a lot there. JP Buys is on the card. That's surprising, given the whole relationship he's got going on there, or lack of one, with ex-wife Cheyenne. Anyways, that was the fights. They were really good. If you did not watch, go check them out. And yeah, looks like we're going for a down slope from the UFC, but we will see. Some of the fights on this card did deliver. Perhaps they will do so again next week. Check out the Discord, check out the Twitter, and check out the Facebook group. All the links are in the description down below, whether you're watching on Acast, Anchor, Spotify, or YouTube. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in a couple of days.